The sun cast a golden hue over the quiet suburban street as Marcus and Ayanna strolled hand in hand, their laughter blending with the rustling leaves. It was a rare Saturday afternoon where work, stress, and responsibilities melted away, leaving only the warmth of their love and the simple joy of being together. They had just finished a delightful lunch at a local cafe and were now heading toward their car, parked a few blocks away. As they walked, Ayanna squeezed Marcus's hand and smiled. "We should do this more often," she said, looking up at him. "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "No work emails, no deadlines. Just us." They were lost in conversation when the low rumble of a motorcycle echoed from the distance. At first, it was just background noise, the kind that naturally blends into city life. But as the sound grew louder, Marcus glanced over his shoulder and saw a large biker speeding down the road. The rider, a middle-aged man in a black leather vest, dark sunglasses, and a helmet adorned with a faded Confederate flag, seemed to have no intention of slowing down. Marcus instinctively guided Ayanna closer to the sidewalk. But as the biker neared, something about his demeanor made the hairs on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. Instead of simply passing by, the man revved his engine aggressively, slowing his bike as he approached. The moment stretched unbearably. Ayanna, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, tightened her grip on Marcus's arm. Then it began. The biker smirked, lifting his sunglasses to reveal piercing blue eyes filled with something unmistakably cruel. "Didn't expect to see your kind around here," he sneered, his voice dripping with hostility. Marcus's jaw tensed. He had dealt with microaggressions before, the passive-aggressive stares, the muttered comments under breath. But this was different. This was direct, unapologetic. Ayanna took a deep breath, keeping her voice measured. "We're just taking a walk," she said, refusing to be rattled. The biker chuckled, but there was no humor in it. He adjusted his grip on the handlebars, leaning slightly forward. "Yeah? Well, maybe you should take a walk somewhere else." Silence. A wave of unease settled between them. Marcus could feel the tension radiating off Ayanna, and he knew she was doing her best to stay calm. But he also knew that silence could be dangerous. "Excuse me," Marcus finally said, his voice firm but even. The biker cocked his head as if sizing him up. "You heard me," he said. "People like you." He gestured vaguely with his hand. "You don't belong in this neighborhood. Always coming around, ruining good places." Marcus's fists clenched at his sides, but he took a steadying breath. He wasn't going to let this man get to him. He had dealt with worse, but something about this situation felt different. The biker wasn't just some random bigot throwing slurs. He was enjoying this. Ayanna, ever the voice of reason, placed a calming hand on Marcus's arm. "Let's just go," she whispered, but Marcus could hear the slight tremor in her voice. She was scared, and that made his blood boil. But the biker wasn't finished. He revved his engine again, the sound roaring through the quiet street. A couple walking in the distance paused and looked over, but no one intervened. No one ever did. Marcus exhaled sharply, his mind racing. This wasn't just about them. This was about standing up, about not letting people like this think they could intimidate others into silence. And then, like a switch flipping, he knew what to do. He pulled out his phone. The biker laughed. "Oh, what? You gonna call the cops?" "Good luck with that, buddy." Marcus wasn't calling the cops. He was calling someone else. Someone who wouldn't just diffuse the situation, but who would change everything. As the phone rang, Marcus locked eyes with the biker, his voice unwavering as he said, "You're about to find out." The biker's smirk faltered just slightly, and that was all the confirmation Marcus needed. The phone rang once, twice, then finally, "Yo, Marcus, what's up?" A deep, steady voice came through the speaker, immediately grounding Marcus in a sense of control. He didn't even have to say much. The tone of his voice, the tension in the air, was enough to convey the urgency of the situation. "Got a little problem," Marcus said, keeping his eyes locked on the biker, whose expression had shifted ever so slightly from smug amusement to mild curiosity. The man on the other end of the line hesitated for only a second before responding. "Where are you?" Marcus rattled off the street name and intersection. "Say less," the voice replied. I'm on my way. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The biker tilted his head, the smirk returning. What? Call you a little backup, he scoffed. Think that's going to scare me? Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Ayanna, brushing a reassuring hand against her arm. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, but her eyes told him everything. She was angry, she was unsettled, and more than anything, she was exhausted. Exhausted of moments like this, of always being on edge, of always having to second-guess how safe they were in places that should belong to everyone. The biker, still parked in the middle of the street, revved his engine once again, as if the sound alone could drown out their presence. He wanted control. He wanted intimidation to work. But Marcus wasn't giving him that satisfaction. You don't seem scared, the biker noted after a moment, leaning slightly to one side. His tone had changed, less arrogant now, more probing, like he was trying to gauge whether or not this situation was still tipping in his favor. I'm not, Marcus said simply. The biker chuckled, shaking his head. See, that's the problem with you people, he mused, almost lazily. Always acting like you own everything. Always pushing into places where you don't belong. Ayanna inhaled sharply beside him, but Marcus didn't let his focus waver. Instead, he took a deliberate step forward, closing the gap just slightly between them and the man on the motorcycle. And where exactly? Marcus asked, his voice cool and steady. Do we belong? The biker narrowed his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, at least not without someone backing down first. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. But before he could answer, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle caught all of their attention. Marcus and Ayanna turned toward the street, just in time to see a sleek black SUV pull up to the curb with a controlled, deliberate stop. The door opened, and out stepped the man Marcus had called. The biker's smirk twitched, but this time it didn't quite reach his eyes, because standing before him now was someone he clearly hadn't expected. The man who had just arrived was imposing, not in an exaggerated, aggressive way, but in the kind of presence that commanded attention the moment he entered a room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a clean-cut black polo and dark jeans. But it wasn't just his stature that made the biker tense. It was the way he moved, the confidence in his steps, the way his sharp brown eyes flickered from Marcus and Ayanna to the biker in one smooth, assessing glance. He was a man who had seen things, who had dealt with things far worse than this. And it was clear, from the slight shift in the biker's posture, that he recognized it too. You good? The man asked Marcus without looking away from the biker. All good now, Marcus replied. The biker scoffed, though there was a new edge to it. And who the hell is this supposed to be? The man tilted his head slightly, considering him for a moment. Then he pulled something from his back pocket and flipped it open with ease. A badge. Not a police badge. Not some cheap security ID. A military badge. The biker's face twitched. Lieutenant Carter, the man said casually, flipping the badge closed again. United States Marine Corps. Retired. Silence. Tension rippled through the air, thick and undeniable. Ayanna exhaled softly beside Marcus, and for the first time since the entire encounter started, Marcus felt the shift. The biker had lost whatever sense of power he thought he had. You served? Carter asked after a beat. The biker hesitated. No, he muttered. Carter nodded, his expression unreadable. Didn't think so. The biker shifted uncomfortably on his bike. The arrogance was draining from his posture, replaced by something far less certain. Carter took a slow step forward. Now, he continued, his voice steady but firm, I don't know what made you think it was a good idea to stop here and harass these two people for simply existing. But I do know one thing. He let the words hang for a moment. You made a mistake. The biker's hands flexed on the handlebars, but he didn't say anything. Marcus could see it, the way the man's confidence was unraveling. He had come into this encounter thinking he was in control, that his words, his presence, his sheer audacity would be enough to make them shrink. But now he was the one unsure, and he hated it. Carter tilted his head. What's the problem? He asked. You were talking all that big talk a minute ago. The biker's mouth pressed into a thin line. His knuckles were white against the handlebars now, his breathing slightly shallower than before. Carter's voice dropped, steady and calm. If you got something to say, say it. For a moment, it looked like the biker might actually try. But then, with a frustrated growl, he jerked his bike into motion, revving the engine one final time before speeding off down the street without another word. The roar of the motorcycle faded into the distance. Silence settled. Ayanna let out a breath she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. Marcus turned to Carter, shaking his head with a small smirk. Man, you really know how to make an entrance. Carter chuckled. That's what I do. Ayanna finally broke her silence. Thank you, she said, her voice sincere. Really? Carter nodded. You don't owe me thanks, he said simply. No one should have to deal with that kind of garbage. Marcus exhaled, feeling the last of the tension drain from his body. The fight wasn't over. Not just this moment, but the bigger picture. But for today, for this moment, they had won. The sound of the motorcycle had long faded into the distance, but the weight of the encounter still lingered in the air. Marcus could feel it in Ayanna's grip, still tight around his hand, and in the way her shoulders remained tense, even as the immediate danger had passed. Carter, standing beside them, exhaled slowly and scanned the street, his trained eyes noting everything. The bystanders who had watched but said nothing, the subtle way the neighborhood still seemed frozen, as if waiting to see what would happen next. This wasn't new. Not for Marcus. Not for Ayanna. And definitely not for Carter. This kind of thing happened often around here? Carter finally asked, turning back to them. Marcus scoffed. You mean random racists trying to remind us we don't belong? Yeah, more than you'd think. Ayanna sighed, rubbing her temples. Usually it's just stares, muttered comments. But every now and then, someone like him comes along. Carter's jaw tightened. He had spent years in the Marines, serving alongside people of every race, background, and belief system. He had fought for the very ideals that this biker had just tried to trample on. And yet, here he was back in the so-called land of the free, watching the same battles being fought, just in a different way. That guy's not just some random racist, Carter said after a moment. He knew exactly what he was doing. Ayanna frowned. What do you mean? I mean, that wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment encounter, Carter explained. That guy was waiting for someone to intimidate. Marcus stiffened. You think he was targeting us specifically? Carter shook his head. Not necessarily you, but people like you? Yeah. The words hung heavy in the air. Ayanna exchanged a glance with Marcus, her expression troubled. We've been coming to this neighborhood for years, she murmured. Sure, we've had our fair share of stares, but nothing like this. That's because something changed, Carter said firmly. And, just like that, the conversation took a new turn. Because now, it wasn't just about one man's hatred. It was about why. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing his chin as he processed Carter's words. So what are you saying? That this isn't just about some random guy being racist? Carter crossed his arms. I'm saying it's bigger than that. The three of them stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of Carter's words settling in. Then, without another word, Carter pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Ayanna asked. Checking something, Carter muttered as he typed. His fingers moved quickly, scrolling through news headlines, forums, anything that might give him an answer. And then, he found it. His eyes narrowed. Bingo! He turned the phone toward Marcus and Ayanna, showing them the article that had just popped up on his screen. Local biker club allegedly tied to hate group activity in suburban areas. The headline alone made Ayanna's stomach twist. Marcus took the phone from Carter's hand and quickly scanned the article. It says here that a group of bikers calling themselves the Iron Fangs have been stirring up trouble in neighborhoods like this, targeting black-owned businesses, intimidating residents, making their presence known. Ayanna's eyes widened. You think he was one of them? Carter nodded. Would explain a lot. Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. He could still hear the way the biker had spoken to him. People like you don't belong here. The way he had reveled in his intimidation tactics. The way he had assumed no one would stand up to him. And now, it wasn't just about one man. It was about an entire movement. This is bigger than us, Marcus said, his voice quieter now, but no less resolute. This is organized. Carter nodded grimly. And if it's organized, that means there's a pattern, a reason. And that means we can do something about it, Ayanna finished. A plan was beginning to take shape, one that would change everything. A plan was forming. Not just a reactive response to what had happened, but a real strategy, one that would not only expose the truth behind the so-called Iron Fangs, but also ensure that their intimidation tactics wouldn't work in this neighborhood, or any other. Carter was already steps ahead, mentally running through his contacts, the resources available, and the best way to hit these guys where it hurt. This isn't just about one biker messing with you, he said, his voice low but steady. This is about power, control, fear. These guys thrive on it. If we let them get away with it here, they'll just keep going. Ayanna nodded, her eyes burning with determination. So what do we do? Carter exhaled, then looked at Marcus. First, we gather proof. We need to connect this guy to the bigger picture. Marcus immediately pulled out his phone. I was already recording when things started getting tense, he admitted. Didn't get everything, but I got enough. Carter raised an eyebrow. Smart. Marcus quickly reviewed the footage before handing the phone over. The video clearly showed the biker's face, the aggressive revving of his engine, the racist remarks. Everything they needed to prove this wasn't just a harmless exchange. Carter smirked. This is good. Real good. But it's not enough, Ayanna added. We need more. Carter nodded. We need to show a pattern. If this group is doing this in other areas, there's got to be other victims. And that was where the real work began. For the next few days, Marcus, Ayanna, and Carter dug deeper into the Iron Fangs. They searched online forums, community reports, and news articles. They reached out to Black-owned businesses in the area, asking if they had faced similar encounters. And the more they looked, the more they found. Patterns emerged. Reports of bikers loitering outside certain stores, revving their engines, making people feel unsafe. Instances of vandalism with no clear suspect. Anonymous threats made to new businesses trying to open up in traditionally white-majority neighborhoods. The evidence was undeniable. And then they hit gold. A small business owner named Denise, who ran a cafe just a few blocks away, shared her story. They came by a few weeks ago, she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. Said I should think twice before setting up shop where I wasn't wanted. They didn't outright threaten me, but it was clear what they meant. Did you report it? Marcus asked. Denise let out a humorless laugh. To who? The cops? Please. They wouldn't do a damn thing. Probably friends with half of them. Ayanna's jaw clenched. It was infuriating how many people were suffering in silence, feeling like they had no one to turn to. But not anymore, because they weren't just collecting stories. They were building a case. By the end of the week, they had everything they needed. A network of victims willing to speak up. Video footage of the biker who had confronted Marcus and Ayanna. Even social media screenshots tying members of the Iron Fangs to white supremacist groups. It was time to take action. Carter made the first call to a trusted journalist he had worked with before, someone with a reputation for exposing injustice. Within hours, the journalist agreed to cover the story, promising a full investigative report that would bring the Iron Fangs into the public eye. Next, they contacted local activist groups, who immediately rallied behind the cause, organizing a community safety initiative to ensure that these neighborhoods remained protected. And finally, they confronted the Iron Fangs in the best way possible, by taking away their anonymity. Using social media, they exposed key members, linking them to their real names, jobs, and affiliations. No more hiding. No more intimidation without consequences. By the time the news broke, the Iron Fangs were in full retreat. Some members tried to deny involvement. Others deleted their accounts, going silent as the public backlash grew. And those who had been caught in videos harassing innocent people, they faced real consequences. Police investigations, job terminations, lawsuits from business owners who had been affected. One by one, the bikers who had once thrived on fear began to crumble. And for the first time in a long time, the community felt something different. Not fear, not intimidation, but power. Real, undeniable power. The change was undeniable. Just weeks ago, Marcus and Ayanna had been on the receiving end of blatant racism. A chilling reminder that no matter how much progress had been made, there were still people desperate to hold onto the past. But now, the streets told a different story. Where fear had once lingered, strength had taken its place. The cafe, owned by Denise, the small business owner who had feared retaliation, was now thriving. After the Iron Fangs were exposed, the community had rallied around her, showing their support in the best way possible, by making her business a local staple. The shop was always packed now, and her story had inspired others to take a stand, knowing they weren't alone. The journalist Carter had contacted didn't just cover the Iron Fangs. She uncovered their entire operation. It turned out that the biker gang had connections to extremist groups beyond the local area, and the public exposure had triggered a wider investigation into their activities. Some members faced legal consequences, while others simply fled, unable to withstand the intense scrutiny. And the best part? The community had found its voice. What had started as a single act of hate had been transformed into a movement. Neighborhoods began organizing their own watch groups, ensuring that intimidation tactics like the ones Marcus and Ayanna had faced would never be ignored again. Local businesses joined forces, creating a support network that made it nearly impossible for hate groups to operate in secrecy. The message was clear. Hate had no place here. One evening, Marcus, Ayanna, and Carter found themselves walking through the same street where it had all begun. It was different now, brighter, safer. The weight that had once pressed down on Marcus's chest every time he passed through was gone. In its place, a deep sense of belonging. "We did that," Ayanna murmured, taking in the sight of the bustling community around them. Families walked freely. Business owners chatted with customers. The air felt lighter, freer. Carter smiled. "Damn right we did." Marcus exhaled, then turned to Carter. "We couldn't have done it without you." Carter shook his head. "Nah, man. You had it in you all along. You just needed someone to remind you." Marcus smirked. "Well, consider us reminded." They stood there for a moment, letting the significance of it all sink in. Then, as if on cue, the sound of a motorcycle rumbled in the distance. For a split second, Marcus tensed. Old habits. But as the bike roared past, there was no threat in the air. No intimidation. Just another person passing through, like everyone else. Ayanna reached for Marcus's hand and squeezed. This was their neighborhood, and no one was ever going to take that from them again.